Hi all, welcome to another Mountain Midwest Hub webinar. I'm Ellie, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Regional Training Director here at the Mountain Midwest Hub. So this webinar is part of a larger series that we do, just providing micro learnings that our hub offers to supplement different learning and leadership development opportunities for leaders in the Y. So really excited to have y'all meet our panel today. We're going to be discussing the topic of trans joy in health and wellness. We've got a couple familiar faces on the panel and some new ones as well. I will introduce our facilitator, and then our facilitator will introduce the rest of the panel to you all. Laura is our facilitator for this lovely discussion today. Laura was also our speaker for the Body Diversity, Sizeism, Accessibility webinar that we did earlier this year. So really lucky and grateful for them joining us again today and facilitating this discussion. Laura's been an educator on topics related to equity, accessibility, and embodiment for 15 years, and they're also the founder of Positive Force Movement, which provides educational and empowerment related services to people who have historically faced systemic disenfranchisement in a way that honors the full selves and identities of all who seek their services. The bio for Laura does continue, and they've done a lot of really impressive things. So if you would like to learn more about Laura, I'm sure they'll share a bit more about themselves as well, but there is more on our link post for this event about Laura and about each of our panelists. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and I'm going to start spotlighting our panel slowly here.
Absolutely. Welcome all. I am so grateful to be here. We were just reflecting the panelists at the start of what a gift this opportunity is to really be centering the trans experience in a conversation about embodiment. And so I'm going to do a quick rundown of the bios of the presenters, many of whom I have worked with already before. I'm so excited. But again, as Ellie was saying, there's additional information. Please seek out the work being done by all of these panelists. It's important work, and this conversation is just the beginning. So Chloe uses she, her pronouns. And she serves as the Director of Alumni Relations for Palo Alto University. On the first audio reality show of its kind, Being Trans, that's been featured in New York Times. She's been honored by the LA Dodgers, which is pretty cool for her activism. We met through our mutual connections in Rochester, New York. And I'm excited to hear her experiences as a real activist in regards to the trans experience, and serves on nonprofit boards and in her day-to-day life in a very passionate way for the community. Sahara, whose correct gender pronouns are he, him, is a health coach, focuses mainly on the LGBT community and particularly trans men, and really looks at how movement and gym environments are part of this journey of gender affirmation. And Ilya, he and they, correct gender pronouns. If you follow Decolonizing Fitness, or if you know anyone who's been influenced by Decolonizing Fitness, if you heard that phrase, like Ilya is a real seminal force in the conversation we're going to be having, and has been written and about and featured for a lot of their educational work in a variety of aspects related to body justice. Chris is the he, him, founder of Transplaining for Camps, and executive director of Camp Reimagined, has been working for 17 years on really bringing the camp experience to in a trans affirming way to create a further context of belonging. And Justice, he, him, founder of Fitness for All Bodies, certified personal trainer, head coach at Kettlebell Justice, founder of the Queer Pop-Up Gym and Body Image for Justice, executive director of Fitness for All Body, editor, author, and all around Puppy Foster, amazing human being, based in Boston, and also was a real source of connection and community when I first became a kettlebell coach, because we were at the same certification. So right from the beginning. So there's a lot of experience in this room. And I intentionally picked questions to really give center to these panelists taking this conversation where they need it to go. Just as a quick context, a conversation about trans joy here has a deep context. 49 states in 2023 have introduced anti-trans legislation. So unless you live in Delaware, there's been legislation introduced within your state this year alone that has as its purpose a restriction of the rights of LGBTQ people, and particularly trans people, and our ability to live safely and freely, to feel included in school, in society, in work, in life, in relationship, and to be treated with dignity, respect, and equity. So a conversation about trans joy may seem a little out of left field, but there is some really deep connections to be found in regards to what the gifts are of gender expansiveness and gender inclusion and gender affirmation. So I'm gonna start off before doing the first question with a quotation from the artist Thornton Dial. It's trying to blur the background. I was thinking about this. He had a quotation. All truth is hard truth. We're in the darkness now, and we got to accept the hard truth to bring on the light. You can hide the truth, but you can't get rid of it. And when truth come out in the light, we get the beauty of the world. So that kind of entry point to trans joy of bearing witness to each other's truth as a way to enter the beauty of the world is a gift I offer at the beginning. And our first question with all of that is going to jump off with Chris, and then other panelists will have an opportunity from there. I'd like to invite Chris to share an aha moment that he's had in regarding his evolving understanding of gender. Yeah, take it from there.
Hello, my name is Chris. I use he, him pronouns. And I think when I think about kind of my gender journey in the last year, it actually really kind of also follows some of the work that I'm doing, in that I feel like I'm going to be 40 this year. It's a big year. So I'm doing a lot of reflecting, a lot of thinking. It's also my 20th anniversary working in camps. And so I've been thinking a lot about kind of like my connection with camp and why it feels so strong. And kind of in combination with my gender journey, what I realized this year was just how far my queer and trans identity had removed me from the natural environment. Thinking about queer and trans access to safe spaces in the outdoors. I grew up in a very small town in Kentucky where I roamed the woods and I, walked the creeks and came home muddy every day. And it was a really beautiful space to live until I came out. And then it was no longer a safe space. And I thought my only choice was to move to a big city away from everything that I had known and loved. And I think so I've been spending the last year like really kind of reclaiming my home and really thinking about how I can be in relationship with the natural environment of Kentucky. I no longer live there, but allowing myself the space to like re-explore what that relationship could be has been really, really powerful and connects very much to the work that I'm doing in summer camping to try to get more queer and trans folks access to outdoor spaces that are safe for them. So that has been one of my biggest ahas this year.
I see Ilya nodding. I think about some of the work you're doing in reclaiming spaces in different ways than the camp experience. You having a thought?
Oops, sorry. Having a little thought. Thanks everyone for just the opportunity to be here. Coming to you from the unceded indigenous territory of the Sapani people, colonized as Thomasville, North Carolina. I am in a little rinky-dink town, so my lived experience is always influenced by just me being isolated from my greater queer community, especially Black trans folks. Excuse me. I do want to preface this by saying that because I'm no longer moving in deep, deep survivorship, I have my basic needs met. I have continuous emotional support. I'm able to actually reflect on my lived experiences enough to articulate them to digestible points for people. And that is a literal luxury for Black trans folks, especially in this current political moment where we are. And so I remember getting back to the aha moment one morning, like waking up and thinking, I'm not trans, I'm not non-binary. And while I understand the need to name and proclaim our gender identities and expansiveness as to not be erased, as to find community and support networks, these identifying markers are the way that the world looks at me and sees incongruity and dissonance. When in fact, I'm like a beautiful iteration of harmony, just as I am. The societal like views of trans and gender expansiveness is still really, really trapped in like this cisgender imagination, which filters me and all my kindred as non-normative. And it's literally viewing us as somehow defying that norm, and always having to bump against the norm. When we can recognize people who have different names, we can recognize when people, have other markers that make them them, their soul that makes them them, but somehow we want to divide billions and billions of people into two categories arbitrarily designated by like a series of like symbols and hieroglyphics and stuff like that to associate with masculinity and feminine. And it's so uncreative. We're so much more varied than that. And it's often very sad to me, because we're like relegated to these categories amongst an infinite array of options. And then on top of that, these categories are looked at as antagonistic and oppositional. So I encourage us to untether gender and to untether it from like normativity, and to think how that can actually help all of us expand and be free to just be our true selves, however that presents. So that's just something that I wanted to share.
I'm seeing some big nods from both Justice and Chloe. Do either of you feel called to jump in?
Okay,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
right. I got the point. I thank you so much. And Ilya, that was powerful. That was real, and thank you. I think, one of the things I started doing shortly after my transition started socially was saying something I never thought I would say before starting the transition, and that is, I carry enormous privilege as a white trans woman, and I did not. I didn't think about that. Ilya mentioned the norm, and I tried my entire life to fit into that norm. I was captain of the high school football team. All of these things like that, like all American, existence that people thought, this is great. I played football in college. I was a bouncer. I did all these things to fit because I wanted to fit, because I wanted to be in community. And, it almost killed me. It almost killed me. And seeing the power on this panel and seeing the power in the queer and the trans community is something that helps me keep going, because there are bad days. There are often bad days. I mean, every time you leave the house, there's a threat. And that's not easy to live with. And that's why I'm so excited to be part of a panel where we're discussing trans joy, because things did get better, and not in the way that I wanted them to, and not in the way that I thought they would, but they got better. and that's a possibility. And, you know, that was my aha moment, was eventually I was like, oh, it's not the way I envisioned. It's not the way that I thought I would look or wanted to, etc. But it got better. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Thank you for calling me out. You know, I was just thinking, I grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey, right? I was born in 1974. Context is very important when you think about the stories of trans individuals and trans community members, because, we think about access, we think about these ideas, we think about labels. When I was growing up, whiteness defined queerness, defined transness. And I learned that that was not rooted in Blackness. So as an activist, I grew up an activist. I mean, I grew up like literally fighting a fight to free political prisoners. I grew up, in the hood, Atlantic City, New Jersey, BAC. And I was actually accepted, without the language. There was no language around transness. Maybe they called me a tomboy, maybe they called me whatever. But, my family always called me, they would say, Justice is the boy and my brother is the girl in our family. And we pretty much did dishevel these ideas that people held around gender, because we lived our lives and we celebrated our bodies, we celebrated ourselves just as they are within our families. And no one questioned it. No one demonized me for being who I am. And no one demonized my brother for being on the opposite scale of masculine, right? We just lived. And in this fight, I recall learning this distance that Ilya tells us about, but this distance is rooted in whiteness, right? Whiteness teaches us a very binary way of living and existing so that we can compete against each other and not find our connection and be in sync with each other, in which we are. We're all connected, whether we recognize it or not. We all are linked in this world, whether we see those links or not. And we are all affected by each other's experience, whether we feel it deeply or not. It's important that we understand that in the context of my life, I was separated from my gender, and my body was used as violence against men within activism, because I've always been strong. I've always lived my life as I am, unquestioning, right? I never questioned my gender, like, oh, I just lived it and I celebrated, and coming up against society that wanted to put me back in my place, coming up against the society that wanted to erase me, coming up against the society that would amputate me with the quickness, although I am not an illness or should not be separated, right? My aha moment was being tired of seeing Black trans women die at such a horrific rate. And in whiteness, we have to define ourselves through the labels and identities that whiteness gives in order to be seen and viewed as an element of yourself that is in connectivity to Black trans women. So I had to identify myself as a Black trans man to even advocate for my sisters and be viewed as valid. I couldn't just be a part of the activist community being like, oh, I want to celebrate. No, I had to come out. And in that coming out, it made me valid to speak out about the deaths of my sisters, about the suicides of my brothers, about how my brothers don't have access in a city that's so liberal. And Fenway Health is supposed to be here to support the queer and trans community. But we're in Dorchester sharing needles and sharing testosterone. right? I come from a space where, you know, people are looking at this access, you get medical care online, right? There's high access for us in these states, even though things are going backwards, things do not look like the way they did in 1974 in the 80s. They don't look like how they did in the 90s. You know what I mean? So we have to be honest about that context, right? And how Black trans women have led the path for us being seen, for us being heard, for us being valid in this world. But yet they still die because we live in a white supremacist, cis hetero, patriarchal, capitalistic society as defined by bell hooks, right? In ways where we have to say that Black lives matter. We're distancing ourselves from our own identities because society separates us from one another and separates us from each other. Where I find joy in my life is in that connection, in that connectivity, in my activism, in that being that passion, in that power, right? That investment in bringing us together. I feel like my strength is bringing the unusual suspects together, those who do not want to be in the room together having conversations. And I'm able to bring them together and move beyond the ideas that we have inherited and internalized from whiteness.
And that is the perfect segue into a question that I know is the focus of a lot of your work, Justice, directly in terms of how white supremacy impacts the lived experience of gender in like how white supremacy impacts transness and the ways that, how did I word it? The ways that white supremacy directly impacts societal ideas of what gender roles are, as well as the lived experiences of trans individuals. Is there anything that you want to add to what you just so passionately shared specifically around that topic?
I just go to what Ilya said. You know, I loved how he said that embodying, how we embody ourselves, and that is rooted in love. And before whiteness comes in, right? We're just being ourselves. We're just, you know, there is no definition of man or female. We're just existing. Whiteness defines queerness. Whiteness defines transness. Whiteness defines gender. Whiteness defines race. Whiteness defines class. Whiteness designates whether we have access to the things that we need in our lives, right? When I think about wellness, or when I think about the ideas that we've learned around normacy, I think about the ways that it has created self-hate inside my body, and that self-hate created disconnection with other Black people within my community, and that hate created separation within other people within my society, because I've hated myself so much, right, that I deemed myself the problem. I must be the problem. It's pathological, right? Whiteness says that race, when we start talking about race, that's pathological. No, whiteness says when we start talking about gender, that's pathological. Whiteness says when we start talking about otherness, when it's not normal, it's pathological. Saying it's pathological means erases me. It erases my validity. It erases my voice, right? That is eugenics at work. That is eugenics saying what normacy is, and us following suit, saying that eugenics doesn't exist. But it's deeply rooted in our wellness and fitness industries. It's deeply rooted in all of our industries, right? In the ways that we exist in the world. And so I want us to recognize that we are colonized, and whiteness has bamboozled us. Whiteness has colonized our desires, our hearts, right? One thing I want people to think of when we think about, I've asked many people, When I say the word queer, what community do people automatically think about? White people. When I say trans, what trans person pops in your head? A white trans person, right? So when we think about these ideas, we're still overarchingly thinking about white supremacy and in the ways that it defines who we are and the roles that we play in this world.
I want to give a overt invitation that I want other panelists to circle into these ideas, but this is such a beautiful entry point to the next question, right? Which is centered around within movement and embodiment, the different experiences of gender dysphoria and gender euphoria. And what I am hearing shared in different ways from everyone who's spoken before is that dysphoria, to a certain degree, is when we experience ourselves like restriction on free expression and recognition and respect of who we are and who we are showing up in the space as, and the authenticity and validity of that, when that is denied. And that a gateway to gender euphoria is being in presence in a moment where it is safe and okay to be who you are, contradictions and all, ways that we do not conform and all, right? I think that there's a bridge here to that question that I'm going to have Ilya start off with and then open up to all the panelists about that relationship between movement and embodiment and how gender dysphoria and gender euphoria interact with that.
Thank you, Laura. And Justice, oh my God, you always bring tears to my eyes every time I hear you speak. And it just takes me to a place. I love you so much, my brother. I love you. Absolutely love you. So I always struggle with this because trans folks, we keep each other safe. We know what each other needs. We know where to seek comfort in each other, and that's directly linked to our trans joy. And so I'm really want to speak from a place of, since we know how to keep each other safe and know what we need to do, let me help you. Let me take my time and my energy and start helping the world more do the things to help keep us safe. Because for me, gender dysphoria literally causes a nervous system dysregulation because the world is othering me. And for all of the ways that Justice beautifully articulated how white supremacy impacts my day-to-day life, because I'm just trying to live. I'm literally just trying to do anything that anyone else is doing. Now, with the dysregulation, I have used particularly strength training to find my way back into my body, specifically intentional movement, because I think too foundational components is for anyone who is wanting to engage in movement and for movement practitioners. Number one, you need to learn about diet culture. First of all, you need to move from an anti-oppression, anti-racist, trauma-informed, fat liberation, anti-ableist perspective. And that's not just a whole bunch of big words we're throwing around in academic language. I literally want you to dig into, you can literally just follow us and learn about every single thing I just mentioned. That's the foundational component to the work you're doing to be in right relationship, number one, with the land, which is the decolonial aspect of it, right relationship with how you feel inside of your body, right relationship with how you move and connect to the world around you in a self compassion way for you and compassion towards others. All of that is intrinsically linked. You can't do no work for you or nobody else until you have that component. And so what I had to do was dig into that. I'm still digging into that, still learning, even as I'm getting back into my movement journey for the umpteenth hundredth time. because I have a lot of chronic injuries from working out in very, very harmful ways as a trans masculine person. And that's a whole separate lane. The subculture of trans masculinity, where we're taught to really be violent towards our bodies to chase a particular aesthetic. Very, very gender essentialist, hegemonic views of masculinity that absolutely no one can attain unless they are taking drugs or types of supplements are really damaging their body. And again, if you're not in right relationship, you're already going down the wrong path. So what I had to do was, number one, understand what nervous system dysregulation even felt like in my body, to allow for it to guide me in the ways that I needed to move, to get curious about what movement felt good in my body, to be aware of my body in space, how it moves, what it feels like moving this way, what it feels like when my feet are actually grounded, when my body and soul and spirit is grounded, when I'm now starting to get into somatic practices and all of that and all that embodies, what it feels like to move intentionally, where I'm lovingly exchanging this connection between weight and my body. All of those things were important for me to learn through my movement journey. And unfortunately, I didn't know those things when I was training with people way back in the day. I do not coach people now. I probably will, since I've opened up a home gym space. But I encourage you to also, if you are a movement practitioner, learning about diet culture and the ways that it impacts people, gender expansive and trans people who experience day-to-day body-related trauma, who feel unsafe and are often in unsafe and hostile environments, how eating disorders and disordered eating can be at play in our lives. Those of us who are moving through poverty, who don't have access to food, who are living in food deserts, understand how that could cause disordered eating or eating disorder behaviors. Also, when you're working with transmasculine clients, recognizing what eating disorder behaviors could look like in our population, and the list goes on and on and on. I don't want to take up too much space, but those are just some things that are rattling around in my head. I'm gonna stop here.
I don't know. Some of y'all might already know of the poet Andrea Gibson, who uses they, them pronouns, who one of the lines in their poem is, "You keep worrying you're taking up too much space. I wish you'd let yourself be the Milky Way." So Ilya, thank you for the space you take. Thank you to everyone for the space they've taken so far. Sahara, welcome back, video and all. I really want to proactively invite you to dive in with anything that's been coming to mind.
Yeah, for sure. People like Ilya and Justice have educated me a lot on my white transness and my privilege. And like Chris said earlier in the chat, I'm from Kentucky as well. So living here in the South in the Bible Belt, one of the things in the gym culture that I sadly had to experience was getting banned from a gym that I'd been at for 10 years. A lot of the older guys, after I had top surgery and switched locker rooms, really did not like that fact. And when I stood up for myself, I was the one who got banned from the property that day. So it's one of the things that took me back. And I admitted this on my page. I was like, as a white trans person, that's one of the things I've experienced that was so shitty. And people of color that are trans have to experience so much more that I had to experience that day. That made me realize my privilege, because that was the one bad experience I've had. And when I talk to my Black trans friends and they tell me what they go through, sometimes on a weekly basis, makes me realize, how much privilege I had. And that was one of my aha moments, like you all were talking about earlier. And my thing about, and like what Ilya said, my thing about working within the trans space too is recognizing when I work with people and talking about their mental health before I even talk about their physical journey, because some people are in such a space where they're not even ready to dive into where we talk about here's how many grams of protein you need to be eating and all that BS. So I try to recognize with people that I work with that are trans and trans masculine, especially, like, let's talk about what's impacting your mental health right now before I can even see how far we can dive into your health journey, because some people might just need someone to keep them accountable, taking a daily walk, while some people want to prep for a bodybuilding show. So I think whenever you work within the trans fitness space, you have to recognize how easy you have to be with people when you go on that movement journey with them. So Ilya, you made some really good points with that, and that was really well worded on your part. But just being in the fitness space as a trans person has been really eye-opening to me, all of the different journeys that I've gotten to hear about from people that I've had to work with and how much mental health impacts people. And I really appreciate the YMCA for even opening up this panel, because I think gyms need to especially create a safe space for people. And I hear it down here in the South all the time. Trans people want special treatment. And really what I want to see ensured in fitness spaces for trans people is ensuring equal treatment. Like the day that I got banned from MySpace, that was just absolutely insane to me. And I don't want other trans people to have to deal with things like that. I want them to be protected and to know that that can't happen to them in a safe space. So that's something that I'm glad the YMCA cares about. And it's just really touching to see that this whole movement community is listening to the trans experience, like Justice, Ilya, Chris, and myself. Chloe, thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, I think about how, like Ilya was talking about the nervous system, right? I know one of the things I learned very early on as a powerlifting coach was how state of mind and nervous system affects how you move, what your range of motion is, how stable you are, how safely you're going to move, and how much you're going to lift. If your nervous system isn't present and feeling safe, you're not going to move safely. Right. And so creating movement spaces where people don't have to have that spiritual and emotional armor on that's ground level movement safety. Right. So just this idea of how does the work you do? And this is, I want to connect with the people who haven't really directly answered this. I think mostly Chris and Chloe and Justice haven't touched on, how do you change the work you do based upon what you know about the impact of gender dysphoria and euphoria?
I wanted to just add something to that.
Yes, please, Justice, dive in.
Because I love how people was like, oh, safe, 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 safe. Right? I could possibly be not safe right now. I'm sitting in my bed or I'm right? I think I come from a space of rootedness in love. Right? I deconstruct all these ideas and words and language, because I've been in many meetings with white people where I'm talking about race and they'll go, I don't feel safe. And so that safety word is used as a tool to not challenge yourselves about the ways that you are oppressing others in this world, right? So I don't actually like the word safe. So I just project that out there. And then I also want to think about the ways that we view bodies. We forget that everything is relationships, right? And I developed with my family, my community, that our relationship to movement is fitness. And that relationship is attached to how the ways that society view us, how we've internalized the ideas of normalcy, how we move in the world, deconstructing those ideas, recommitting to find ourselves rooted in love, right? And in all of that, we're still not safe, right?
That is so true. The idea of safety weaponized, so that then the attack becomes on how people respond when they say ouch, instead of on the thing that caused the harm.
Yes, exactly. I've been kicked out of trans spaces for talking about being Black and about the ways that this is really racist. And then people will hone in on, we're talking about transness, we're talking about queerness. And this is what I mean about this overarching idea of what is the trans community? What is the queer community? Because that overarching idea is white. We And Kimberly Granshaw came up with intersectionality, right? Even when I talk in white spaces about intersectionality, it comes from a white man. It doesn't articulate the ideas of race, racism, right? And how we perceive like otherness in race, right, as far away from whiteness, far away from like American soil, right? And in this, I love how Ilya gives like we do this land acknowledgement, you know. And I think for me, I want to move beyond, just like I do every day, move beyond acknowledging. I actually actively move beyond acknowledging indigenous, move beyond acknowledging race, move beyond acknowledging gender, move beyond, I'm actively defeating whiteness every day with my existence, right? So when I think about, when I started this journey of embodiment, right, in fitness, I had to deconstruct how we often move. And this was a thing that the brothers would do here. And this is why I'm highly loved, right? That's why the Queer Gym pop-up blew up, right? This is why Body Image for Justice blew up. Why? Because I didn't focus on an aesthetic, right? I mean, I'm gonna laugh with Ilya right now and be like, right, when I did that bodybuilding competition, how odd did I feel? How foreign did that experience look to the greater world for me? Because that's not something that I do. I don't use movement as a practice of structuring my body to fit into a binary culture that rejects me. That's what an aesthetic is, right? The aesthetic is saying that I am willing to insert whiteness into my life and conform, right? It becomes a cult as a part of that fitness culture, right? And so I'm deconstructing this because loving ourselves means moving away from the ideas that whiteness has implanted in our head as normal, that men should look like this and women should look like this. I am not a specialty. I am part of a community where whiteness has erased me and tried to force into the minds of our collective that I need special treatment. No, I don't need special treatment. Those who have other abilities don't need special treatment. Could you imagine learning in school how to speak to deaf people, right, as a regular part of learning, because they are a part of our overarching community? The ways that education is used as a tool to devalue who we are and separate us. Now we're talking about how we're going to learn about Black history in schools, and it was already erased. How much more can you erase me from from the things that we have done to create this country, right? Our history, right? The last thing I want to say is I'm always going, and this is like, it's a scary thing. It's a scary thing because it puts fear in our heart. If we can't live in this way, what does it look like, right? What does equality look like if whiteness doesn't have a hold on it, if we're decentering whiteness? And then a fear comes into place, right? Because what whiteness teaches us is that there always have to be competition. There always has to be one over the other. But when Ilya's talking about equity, we're talking about equality, not one over the other. So that should erase that fear, right? That should erase that fear of one person saying, oh, well, Black people over white people. No, that's not what we want. We want equality, right? We want the same access to resources that whiteness has constructed for white people, right? We want better education, right? We want no more redlining. We want to live in places that are healthy for our bodies. So when we're talking about gender and we're talking about these ideas, I really want to emphasize that we jump out of whiteness in order to see the true picture of the ways that this impacts our bodies in our overarching community.
Yeah, I hear a lot can be shown by what requests for being able to show up in a space are defined as being special and which are assumed as already going to exist. And then to think about the long-term impact of knowing that your needs to be able to show up in spaces as you are not assumed. They are considered something special. They are considered things that have pragmatic considerations and financial considerations. And that when the long-term effects of being told that there are barriers to your ability to show up as you, right? And what that arises from, which I want to check in. Chris, did you have anything you wanted to say on that question before I move on to the bridge to the next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what Justice really started touching on was this safety piece. And I do a significant amount of work with summer camps, and something that I have perpetually had to ask people is that really unsafe or is it uncomfortable? And I think that a lot of times folks who have experienced perpetual safety in their lives, they perceive discomfort as unsafe. And as a white cis-passing trans person, I have to ask myself that question often, right? Like, am I under threat in the way that I think that I am? And often the answer is no. And I have to be really, really aware of that. And I think this actually also feeds into this dysphoria question as well, is like, dysphoria to me is not, I am not disordered. Like, this thing that people say, like trans people have gender dysphoria, it is a social disorder. There's no problem with me. There's a problem with the way people perceive my body. I don't know that. And I think, again, some of this comes with privilege, and some, like Ilya was saying earlier, like I'm in a place where I don't feel under threat all the time. But if I'm in a room by myself, I do not feel gender dysphoria. Like, I feel gender dysphoria when I feel like I'm in a space where people are going to be able to look at my body and other me, and therefore I am under threat. So now I ask myself, like, is this something I'm feeling about my own body, or is it a fear that I'm having about the way other people perceive my body? And I think really, working with youth, because I predominantly work with youth, or people who are going to work with youth. I think we have to get past that point of safe space. It's not going to be enough. We can never assure that anybody is going to be safe in any space ever. We want people to be able to authentically bring their full selves. And then we really get to define like what safety in that space should be comprised of. And it is always a goal, and it is always going to be a journey to get there, because we're never going to have a fully safe space. So ensuring that, again, like that is like the pot at the end of the rainbow, or like whatever metaphor you want to use, instead of a true destination that you're ever going to arrive at. Because even if you do arrive there, there's still so much more work that's going to need to go to keep you there. And so the complacency is just not going to help us. Once we've arrived at the safe space, congratulations, everybody. Like we have to continue to question that.
Absolutely. I want to give a quick pause. Ilya just jumped off for a pre-existing commitment. I want to give a special expression of gratitude to them. They're just missing it, but please, if you like look up their work in the stuff related to this event, and I'm grateful that they were here. And I'm sorry I just missed saying that where they could hear. Yeah, I think that's a really good point of it being well, that's actually a perfect segue for the question that I wanted to direct to Chloe next. And I'm so excited, having kind of watched her unfolding career. What from your perspective needs to change in order to make our workplaces, relationships, communities, and spaces where people can, and I'm gonna change this, where people can show up and feel affirmed and authentic? What needs to change?
I like that. I like the idea that we're building upon towards an authentic space as opposed to a safe space, and showing up as full selves, and knowing that we're speaking with a lot of movement and fitness professionals, and I think it's building an opportunity for people to engage and learn. So for me, speaking specifically of movement and fitness, that was always violence for me. So I played football. I ran into people. I played offensive line. Like, my literal job was trying to move somebody where I wanted them to go and just smash into them. And when I didn't do well, what was the punishment? You have to go run. You have to lift more. You have to punish yourself with more movement to keep the coaches happy. And that didn't work for me. I mean, I lost, and talk of intentional weight loss here, I lost a significant amount of weight when I was in college. And my coaches came to me and they said, "We're so proud of you. You've worked so hard on this. We need you to gain about 60 to 70 pounds. We want you at a healthy 315. There was no such thing as a healthy 315 for me. So one of the things that I think can help change our lives is realizing the influence that we have on people. And people see, movement and fitness experts and professionals in a way of having influence. So understanding where we can exert that is really important. I've had some coaches that were great influences on me. I had some coaches that were absolutely terrible influences on me. And it's great when we start with policy. Policy, establishes a baseline of here's how we're going to work. But it often ends there, and we don't get into the implementation space of it, where, okay, how are we actually going to roll this out? And then it almost never gets to the culture space within an organization of how does this mean we interact with people in the world? And also, going back to what Justice was saying, it creates a sense of otherness and special treatment of, we're going to do this for you specifically, but know that we don't have to. And there's always that, I think about a certain coffee chain who, when there was unionization going on, was like, well, maybe we won't include trans healthcare in our offerings and our benefits. So there's always that threat. So realizing that, if you're occupying that space, that you have this influence, and a willingness to engage with discomfort. One of the things I hear is, I am often the first trans person that a lot of people have met, which is problematic on many levels. And what I was hearing is, I want to be supportive. I don't know how, and I'm afraid I'm going to show up and do or say the wrong thing. So one of the ways that I was able to work with that, and I would encourage you to check out everybody's work here. I was on a show called Being Trans, and they followed me and other trans people in LA around for about 4 to 5 months. And it was about 10 to 15 hours a week. And I am not a person who is great at practicing vulnerability. And they really showed up, and they were like, "Oh, you're going to get good." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So, but through that, I was able to allow people to engage with my identity in a way that hopefully allows them to come to the table as advocates for us in a better, stronger space. And of course, I shouldn't have to do that, but I did, because that is work that needs to be done. And through that, I was also able to come to a place where movement was no longer punishment for me. Football had always been gendered as male, and that's part of why I did it. And coming out here, I was able to re-engage with the sport in a way that felt better for me. I went and played in a gay flag football league. And it was a moment that I realized, oh, this actually is fun. This is not gendered as male. This is something I did enjoy, and people tried to take that away. So I kind of comes back to the piece of influence, providing opportunities, and reinforcing the culture that maybe your organization isn't at yet, but aspires to be.
Other thoughts from panelists on what needs to change to make space for this joy and authenticity to show up in more places?
I think we had a pretty big realization this year in our work with queer and trans equity in camping. And that was that we were missing a huge portion of the work that we should be doing, and that is empowering other queer and trans people to be doing the work. And I think when I think about who is going to turn this around, who's going to make the difference, it's going to be by helping queer and trans people feel their best and empowered to do the work, because we said it before, like we've always protected each other. And I think the more we can bring that energy, the better off it's going to be. So we're actually pivoting a lot of our work this year to focus on building affinity spaces and building healing spaces for queer and trans staff who work at summer camps. And I think the other big piece of it is, we have an important story to tell young people right now. And that is that they're not wrong, right? They know who they are, that there are adults who care about them. And I think a focus on equipping, if we can equip like our generation of folks to be empowered, because we're all a little bit damaged, right? We can be at least speaking to the next generation of people who can make the next difference.
I think for me, like I said, everything that I do is rooted. And because it's rooted in love, I try to model as best as I can with that books. And for this body right here that just turned 49 years old, it means really just listening to my body and trying to find ways to be in my body where I'm acknowledging without it, I would not be here, right? And with acknowledging without it, or, I wouldn't be able to be connected in the ways that I'm connected. I wouldn't be able to love in the ways that I love, right? And so movement to me, especially as a black man of trans experience, has a dualistic kind of meaning, where I'm moving my body, but I am moving my community towards equality, right? And those two things they just happen hand in hand, right? Like I said, when I started, I said, I started in this world fighting for, myself as a Black individual, for Black communities. And I started fighting because I recognized as I'm learning more about myself for queer communities. And I started fighting for political prisoners, but in all of those ways, I was separated. I wasn't a part of those collective communities because they weren't having discussions about my Blackness or my transness or my queerness. I'm often wearing, as James Baldwin would say, I'm wearing the mask of normalcy so that I could give voice to the diversity that exists within, right? And so I think it's time that we as a whole recognize that love is about connection. It's not about disconnection. So I can't say that I love myself if I am pushing myself away, if I am hurting myself, if I am unwilling to see deeply inside myself in the ways that I'm experiencing pain and find healing for that pain, right? As a larger community, it's similar. Love is about connecting with even the things that we don't know, that we don't experience in our everyday life. It means connecting to the communities that have been pushed away and marginalized. But it also means acknowledging, right, and investing in our larger society as a greater whole, not an umbrella of whiteness. So when I look at trans bodies, I see us as revolutionary. When I look at our bodies, I see us as breaking down these binaries and modeling what joy looks like when we exist as our whole beings, when we love ourselves regardless of what systems take away, of what the world says. Loving ourselves regardless means finding authenticity in our voice, in our bodies, and in each other, right? And so that's what movement looks like for me. It's not trying to be an aesthetic or an idea of what a normal male body should look like or what a normal female body should look like. But my body is male in existence, and no one is to dictate what my body is but me.
That was one of the foundations that back in the day when I worked for a while, and it was one of those introductions at the dimensions of diversity training of like, step one, you believe people when they tell you about themselves, right? This sort of like, that is an opportunity for connection. That is an opportunity for love. When someone comes and shares something of themselves, whether or not the response to that is uncomfortable, whether or not that response is sure or confident of how to respond the best way, but when we respond with love and a desire to connect, that's real stuff.
And I just wanted to add one last thing. I think what makes fitness for all bodies unique, and this is really a powerful passion of mine. Like I said, I like to bring the unusual suspects together. I use my body to challenge folks in these conversations. I place my body in careers like security, right? Where security guards are hyper masculine and they're really toxic. And I'm breaking down these ideas and helping them to see the ways that they are separating themselves from our larger community. I don't want to be a specialty. Fitness for All Bodies is not a trans queer organization. It's an organization that brings us all together, no matter our identity or where we land, right? Because we are a larger society and community that should be connected beyond identity and have real conversations with each other in our authenticity, not from the perspective of whiteness, not from the perspective of those in power. And that's how we erase specialty, by just saying we are all a part of this larger thing of connectedness. And we need each other, even if we don't see it. That is our truth.
Thank you for that, Justice. I want to be aware. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask one more question that's directly from me of the panelists. Then I'm going to, after this question and a chance to go around all the panelists and see if they have specific closing words on that, open it up to questions in the chat. So if y'all have had questions that you've written down on your notepads or that you've been wondering about, feel free to put them in the chat, and after this question and closing words, we'll see how many we have time for before the end. So with that said, I want to give Sahara a chance to be the first to answer a question. So I'm curious, what is unique about trans joy? In other words, what gifts, lessons, and opportunities for this connection have arisen from transness or from this process of asking these questions? What is unique about trans joy, and what is the beauty of being visible? Yeah.
Phrase that I think a lot of trans people that we've all heard is reclaiming joy in spaces that we once didn't have it. So a lot of me and my friends talk about how whenever we were younger and had experiences of gender dysphoria and like places where I wanted to be shirtless, and sometimes going to spaces where I felt really bad in the past and my past vessel. Sometimes it's nice to go to those spaces now as my authentic self and reclaim joy in a space where it once felt toxic. So I think a lot of trans people that I've talked with and a lot of clients I've had have done that within the gym as well. A place they used to feel toxic, now that they feel more in their authentic self, it's somewhere where they go to actually feel the exact opposite of that. So I think trans joy is unique because we go and reclaim it in spaces where we once have felt pain or rejected. So I think that's what's unique about it.
The word resilience comes to mind about that trans joy is inherently resilient.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that note because I spent most of my life trying to find joy in the way that others wanted me to find joy. You should be happy about this. You should be joyful about this. And it did not work for me. And I feel like, and I'll only speak for myself, but I feel like, I don't know if the word is won or earned, but my joy did not come easily. My joy did not make itself known very early on and very often, but it's here now, and it's not always here, but it's here sometimes, and those are the times. I mean, our joy is hard fought for, and our joy is won, and our joy is unique, and our joy is deserved.
Yeah, I think, Chloe, that the first word I wrote down was it's earned, right? Like it is truly like like you've gone through a set of experiences, and that means I never take that kind of joy for granted ever. I feel like my greatest trans joy is in community. I think that the way I have learned to be in community with others is a true gift. And while I don't feel like we should have had to struggle for that, we did. But I think about when I'm with my queer and trans friends, and the kindness and the softness and the laughing, right? Like we just laugh, and it just, I think trans joy can change the world. I think that when we can get in touch with the best parts of ourselves and the happiest parts of our being and be in community with each other, I think we can lead a lot of people out of places that they should have never found themselves in to begin with. And that's what trans joy means to me.
To me, trans joy is much like Chris said, it's community. It's really about connection, and it's not just a connection. It's understanding my deeper connection to the land. What is my responsibility? We're thinking about climate change and the ways. I remember listening on NPR, and I was kind of horrified, right? Because NPR is saying that we're in a phase of time where human beings have actually fucked up the world so much that we have to say human beings, this is the time that human beings have fucked up the world so much that they gave it a name, right? And it's like, so we've changed the course of nature, which is unnatural, right? And that is a white supremacist idea. We have control. We have so much control that we now control what has happened to the land, whether it's a fucked up or positive. It's really fucked up, but we control that. We changed, right? And so it's really letting that go and saying that we don't have any control, because we don't, right? And that the change that's happening on the land, the earth will get mad and just shake us off eventually and take that back, right? And so understanding our connectedness to the land, our responsibility to it, our connectedness to each other, our responsibility to each other, right? That to me is joy. You know, and that's the activist in me, because I can't find joy without equity. I can't find joy without being my authentic self. I can't find joy if it's not rooted in love. I can't find joy if you are trying to separate me from my larger community, right? So trans joy should be connection. Joy itself should be connection.
What just a powerful sentiment. I'm gonna let the echoes of that, of joy and connection ring while I give people a chance to either unmute themselves or type a question in the chat. Joy as relation, as connection.